In old age, no matter how dutiful your children are, don't live with them. It may be fun for a few days, but living together long-term can lead to problems. Before we begin, I would appreciate it if you like this video, you can help me continue to spread the old age lesson. If you still need to subscribe, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you can see all the videos. If you like this video, please comment number 1. If you don't like it, comment number 0 to let me know so I can make a better video for you. Now, let's get started. Dear friends, many elderly people, fearing that no one will take care of them in their old age, worry about having no one to care for them when they fall ill or face other issues. They also fear loneliness and want to be around their children or grandchildren. As a result, they decide to move in with their children. When advised not to live with their children in old age, they think that just like fingers vary in length, there are dutiful and less dutiful children. Therefore, the elderly often choose to live with the most dutiful child. However, dear friends, at the age of 60, even if your children are very dutiful, living with them can still lead to issues. It might be enjoyable for a few days, but long-term living together can cause conflicts. Let's reflect on the following stories to understand why. Firstly, Mrs. Dow shared her experience. I am a mother who has lived in the countryside all my life, working in the fields and dealing with dirt. When we were young, my husband and I were poor and had to drop out of school early to start a family. We had a son and a daughter. Despite our hardships, we worked hard to provide for them and ensure they could go to school. Both children were smart and successful. Our son went to university and our daughter followed. They both excelled and received scholarships. After graduating, they easily found good jobs. They live in the city and are busy with work and social activities, so they don't visit often. We are content with our simple life. They only come back during holidays or special occasions. As parents, we have done our duty. What matters is that they are healthy and happy. When our son married and our daughter also got married, we felt we had fulfilled our responsibilities as parents. When our daughter-in-law was expecting, she was anxious about the childbirth. Our son called to ask if I could come and help. I agreed, thinking it was my duty to be there for them. However, when I arrived, my daughter-in-law's attitude was indifferent. She mentioned that our son should not trouble me because they could hire help. She also said, living with my mother-in-law is not ideal. She has different customs and ways of doing things. I told her, if my presence is considered a burden, it means you do not see me as your mother. She remained silent and changed the subject. Fortunately, the birth went smoothly and I helped as much as I could. I made sure to respect her preferences and not interfere too much. I tried to avoid any conflict by discussing everything with her first. A few days later, I overheard a heated argument between my son and daughter-in-law. She complained about my presence and how it was not convenient for her. I was tempted to intervene but decided against it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I realized my daughter-in-law did not appreciate living with me, despite our relatively good relationship. It might be better for both of us to live separately. Living together could lead to conflicts over time. The next morning, I packed my things and prepared breakfast for everyone. I noticed my daughter-in-law's eyes were swollen from crying. I told her, I heard the argument last night, and it made me sad. I came here to help, not to cause problems. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, I'll go back. Life in the countryside is better for me anyway. My son asked me to stay a bit longer, but I insisted on leaving. Later, my daughter-in-law sent me a text message apologizing for her behavior and promising to visit us in the countryside with the baby once they were more settled. Reading her message, I felt relieved. It's clear that living together long-term can lead to conflicts. If living together is not possible, understanding and mutual respect are crucial. Even if we don't live close, we should strive to avoid causing each other distress. They had a place to live compared to renting. With a 40-square-meter plot, they built a temporary house to live in. There are still many good people around. When the children grew up and got married, and the second child came along, the grandparents had nothing to give their children except for a single plot of land on the outskirts of Hanoi, more than 10 kilometers from the center. The children used the distance as an excuse not to want to live there. Selling it would mean losing half of the plot's value. The grandparents kept it, hoping to leave some property for their children, but as the grandchildren were born, the parents' jobs were unstable, and they couldn't even afford rent, so the grandparents had to split up. In Hanoi, they helped take care of the grandchildren. One of them took care of a child in Nan, and the other looked after a child in Hoang Mai. Although both were in Hanoi, it was a month before they could visit each other. Living in rented accommodation was inconvenient, and often the children would discuss moving back to their hometown, selling the house in Hanoi, and living with their grandchildren for easier care. However, because the children worked far from each other, no one wanted to live together with their parents. The grandparents sold the house in the countryside for 1.4 billion VND and the plot of land in the suburbs and gave the proceeds to their 2 children to buy apartments in installments. Each child bought an apartment. The grandparents were very happy that their children now had a place to call their own. However, the joy didn't last long. The grandparents witnessed the oldest and youngest children fighting over who should take care of them. The conflicts between the daughters-in-law were as intense as the conflicts between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. The grandparents ended up living with the older child because the 70-square-meter apartment with 2 bedrooms was larger than the one of the younger child. Living with their children, the grandparents felt suffocated, and the situation worsened after the death of the grandmother. The grandfather felt even lonelier. If you are still watching this video and finding these lessons useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. What the grandfather regrets most is that 4 years ago, his wife unfortunately suffered from lung cancer and died away from home. In her final days in the city, it was very difficult, despite being close to the hospital. Relatives and friends couldn't visit often due to the distance. The wife always faced the wall, expressing her wish to return to their hometown. Although relatives from the countryside wanted to visit, they were hesitant because of the inconvenience. The wife often expressed a desire to have left some of their assets for the children to buy a small plot of land in their hometown and live with relatives. Reflecting on those painful days, the grandfather now regrets having sold all the land in the countryside to move to the city with his children. Many elderly people want to be close to their children, and children want their parents to live in the city for easier care. However, many heartbreaking stories occur. Many people think they can repay their parents with material wealth, but in reality, material wealth is just one part. The more important aspect is attention, care, and emotional closeness. Sometimes all they need are simple words of care and kindness, but children often forget this. Thirdly, dividing land among children. Today I will visit Mr. Lu, a client who is ill and wants to sell land to pay for treatment. When I leave, I will have many thoughts. Mr. Lu, who is over 70 years old, shared that his husband passed away almost 10 years ago. They had 2 sons who were now settled. In the past, they worked hard and saved up, buying land and building spacious homes for each son. They also had a few remaining plots of land as a reserve. Then suddenly Mr. Lu's husband fell ill and passed away early. When they bought land and built houses, Mr. and Mrs. Lu had to struggle, so apart from the land, they didn't have any savings and no pension. They worked hard, which made them age quickly and fall ill. After the husband's death, Mrs. Lu was also devastated and had a minor stroke. Chronic illnesses followed, making it very difficult for her to move. Fearing old age, she called her sons and divided the land, giving more to the older son since he lived with her. She thought this was fair. However, both sons showed dissatisfaction. The older son felt that he was not given enough despite supporting his ill mother, while the younger son was upset that the older brother received more. The daughters-in-law were also involved in conflicts. The older son moved Mrs. Lu to a more convenient apartment for their life. They only provided minimal support. The relatives who used to visit frequently gradually stopped coming, which made Mrs. Lu very sad. The younger son was unhappy about the land division and didn't visit. After several years of hardship and loneliness, Mrs. Lou decided to move to a nursing home, listening to the advice of relatives. The younger son and his wife strongly opposed selling the land to pay for treatment. They argued that the land had value and should not be sold, even though it was Mrs. Lou's. They didn't want to sell it, thinking it was valuable. However, even if the property is in their name, Mrs. Lou cannot sell it without the children's consent. The law stipulates that they are all equal heirs. After explaining this, Mrs. Lou cried in despair and regret. Additionally, even after Mrs. Lou's death, the conflict over the inheritance continued among her children, as the land was divided verbally, but the paperwork was still in the parents' names. There are young people who, after years of hard work to support their children, end up with a small house on a main road to earn a living. Even though they are old, they still have to work hard to pay off debts from buying land for their children. The older son and daughter-in-law who inherited a piece of land on a main road may struggle in the future. They are very distressed and just want to share what they have. It is not that they want to do so. She explains that if they divide the land equally, it would be fair to each person. Even with hardship, some elderly people are still greedy for their children and find it difficult to share the land. Others who have the means should go ahead and build their grand houses first. Life goes on, and then suddenly old age arrives. With no land to fall back on, they dare not sell the land to consolidate their assets. Meanwhile, those who have gone far away and haven't received their share of the land or got less become discontented. Conflicts arise, and the responsibility towards the parents is naturally affected. They bring the land to measure. The internal conflict over the land has not yet ended, and it will be a long time before it does. Could it be that parents also pass on the legacy of mutual destruction to their children when dividing land? The house also has a maid from Saigon. She says that her house is in District 4. Her parents had 12 children, 8 sons and 4 daughters. The house is only in the neighborhood, but the land is quite spacious. Her father passed away early, leaving her mother alone, so they were not well off. In the past, her mother built 2 rows of 18 rooms for rent. She kept 4 rooms for the family and used the rest for renting out. In the following years, some children went to settle in America, some struggled to buy their own houses, some got married, and some joined the military or police and were allocated houses. Some were too poor to afford their rooms and occupied one of the rooms their mother rented out. When she was still of sound mind, her mother made a will dividing the rooms equally among each child, regardless of whether they were male or female, expatriates or street vendors. Each child got 1 room or another. She also allocated the room to Truong for ancestor worship and to UT, who was the weakest and most ill among them. As for the remaining 4 rooms outside, she kept them, repaired them, and rented them out to people, using the money for herself. This was not included in the will for any child. Now her mother, over 90 years old, is no longer clear-minded but still lives very comfortably. The daughter, over 50 years old, realizes that her mother truly had a great plan when she divided the land among her children long ago. From a very young age, her mother proactively built 18 rental rooms. If you are still watching this video and finding these lessons useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The daughter married and had 2 children, and then her husband, who was addicted to gambling, left. She and her children moved back to the room her mother had allocated years ago. They worked hard, and now that the children have families of their own, she works as a maid for a few years to earn money. The elderly room is still there, so every Sunday she returns to her mother. She says that if it weren't for the large room her mother had allocated, she might have died. The rental houses now some very wealthy siblings do not take, but instead give to those who have taken care of the mother closely. Some still live there, some give it to siblings, and some rent it out. However, everyone is happy and feels that the house from their parents is truly a haven in the stormy life with their mother. In reality, although the children take turns caring for her, she has never needed money or moved to their homes. On the contrary, each one is close to her, fearful of losing her, just like before. The daughter recounts that in the house, Some are calculating and want to discuss with the siblings to sell the house together to get a good price and divide the money. However, the mother and daughter have never agreed. This may not matter to the wealthy or those living elsewhere, but it is the home, the breath, the lifeline for the daughter before and after. She and her siblings plan to sell their mother's part of the land after she passes away, using the money to build a place for worship and to arrange a proper funeral for her. Reflecting on when they were in the countryside, their house had 6 siblings. The sisters married, leaving just 2 brothers at home. Their father said that their grandfather had given him a piece of land to build a 5-room house. Throughout his life, their father saved up and bought a piece of land outside the village. They bought a piece of land beyond the dike, which might have been a contingency for the 2 sons when they grew up and moved away. One day they heard that their father had sold the piece of land outside the dike. He exchanged several bushels of rice for it and sent it to his eldest daughter. The father, having already sold it, asked about it. "Oh, you think there's a shortage of money that my father sold the land? This is my matter, and the teachers should mind their own business," the father said, laughing, that he had sold the land years ago, and the few tons of rice had now turned into billions. However, I think my father's calculation of this matter is far greater than the money itself. Years later, when I was wandering, tired, and wanting to give up, thinking of returning to the countryside to live, but imagining the small house of my parents in the poor neighborhood, I thought the future there wasn't bright. So I struggled to stay, adapt, and survive everywhere I worked. In the past, they kept chickens in the countryside. The village was poor, so the father made a chicken coop right at the front of the house. Every day, the chickens in the co-op woke up, walked across the paved courtyard, and went to the garden. In the evening, the chickens returned to the co-op. Whenever the courtyard was clean, the chickens didn't come back to make a mess. They knew that the best thing was to go to the garden for food, rather than come back to the paved yard. Once when I visited my father, just the 2 of us, he told me that the land at the end of the village and Nam's land were left by my grandfather. He gave this land to me because it is ancestral land. This is my land, and I should try to keep it and never sell it for any price. Keeping the ancestral land is keeping the roots, and the small piece of land outside the dike was bought by my parents. It was too small to be included in the will for the children, but it was enough to make a small house for any child to return to in times of storm. I held my father's hand tightly and nodded, understanding. After my father passed away, the ancestral land and the small piece of land in the countryside are still intact. All of us, including me, have managed to buy land and houses in many places. Fortunately, none of us had to return or think about fighting over the land left by our grandparents and parents. Some people say that nowadays moral standards have declined and land and greed have taken the stage. From cities to villages and forests, there are conflicts over land division among parents and children, siblings and relatives. This is certainly true. However, such matters have always existed, and now they are more visible due to the development of mass media. The old saying remains relevant: we should not fret excessively about the future, lest the twilight of our lives be marked by regret and discontent. There's wisdom in the adage that suggests parents nurture their children with the hope that they will reach great heights, much like the aspirations reaching toward the heavens. However, in reality, children often end up supporting their parents, and death is an inevitable part of life that none of us can escape. The future remains an unpredictable entity, beyond our control. Even with substantial wealth and assets, missteps in planning can jeopardize security and fail to safeguard against the uncertainties of old age or the future well-being of one's offspring. Despite our best efforts, some aspects of life and survival remain steadfastly unchangeable. The fundamental rules governing human existence and resilience are nearly immutable. To navigate life effectively, it is crucial to understand and align our plans with these unchanging principles. This approach is the most prudent way to secure one's old age and ensure a favorable future for one's children when it comes to asset distribution and planning. As the evening approached, a subtle tension filled the air. Hawaii cast a brief, contemplative glance in my direction before slowly approaching. Throughout the game that day, the atmosphere remained hushed with no further words exchanged among us. I found myself reflecting deeply on the conversations I had with Hoe and Trung during the dinner that followed. The meal was enhanced by freshly fried fish, a likely result of his fishing expedition earlier that afternoon. As Mom placed a piece of fish on my plate, I usually would have pushed it aside, knowing it was caught by him. However, today I feigned ignorance and ate it with calm acceptance. Grandma and Mom exchanged approving looks, clearly pleased with my behavior. Recently, an unsettling event had occurred in the village. The house next door, where Mrs. Tuan lived, had been targeted by thieves. Initially, 2 chickens were stolen, followed by several more in subsequent days. Mrs. Tuan's frantic cries and the ensuing commotion disrupted the neighborhood. I have a routine of waking up during the night to use the bathroom, but now I find myself hesitant to go outside. Tonight I noticed someone quietly opening the door and stepping out. It struck me as peculiar, and a troubling thought crossed my mind. I began to suspect that he might be the thief. Suddenly there was a scream from Mrs. Zuian's house. I saw Mom and Grandma run out shouting, and I heard the pounding of footsteps. I also jumped up and ran out. In front of me was the scene of him with one foot on the thief's back and with his other hand, along with some young men, tying up the thief. The thief, who was begging, was taken to the commune for resolution. At that moment, everyone turned to praise him, but I still hated him. To me, catching a thief wasn't something to be praised. If you are still watching this video and finding these lessons useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. However, since that day I found that when he was home, I felt no longer afraid of ghosts or thieves. On my father's death anniversary, he woke up very early, went out to the fields, and then came back to prepare a chicken for the feast. Mom was bustling around, going to the market and cooking. He wore a green military uniform with stars on it, standing solemnly in front of the altar. Dad was murmuring prayers, and then he turned to me and asked me to come to perform the ceremony. Although I resented it, I still quietly followed his instructions. As the new school year approached, I saw him working diligently in the evening, cutting a piece of burlap fabric, which he then gave to Mom to sew. On the opening day of school, Mom gave me a very beautiful school bag. I liked it a lot, but pretended not to care. Thang Hoa came to play and liked it so much that he asked for it. Mom said, "Who gave you permission to ask for it?" I was worried and scolded him. "If you don't use it, then give it to me. Who says I won't use it?" So I took the bag, put my books and notebooks in it, and forgot that it was made for me by him. My new school bag was praised by my classmates, making me blush during history class. The teacher talked about the heroes and martyrs of our commune. In her story, she mentioned him. My classmates looked at me in surprise, but I acted as if nothing happened, focusing on reading. The teacher's voice continued. In our commune, there is a war veteran who lost an arm. Despite losing an arm and having many scars from the war, he remains a representative of our commune in building the homeland. There are his innovations and contributions that have made our school much better today. The injury to his arm was due to his bravery in protecting his comrades. You know that the person he protected was Min's father. That's why he didn't die in battle. Who told you that I jumped up, forgetting that the teacher was in the classroom? My dad said, "If you don't believe it, ask your mother," I shouted. "That's not true. You're lying," and ran out of the class. That afternoon I wandered along the dike, not going home. When the sun started to set, I heard my name being called from the dike. I heard Mom, the teacher, and Grandma's voices carried by the wind. I went down to the dike, through the dusty place with wild roses and thick sugarcane fields, to reject the thought that he had saved my father. I couldn't accept living with a lie. If he sacrificed himself to save my father, then why would he still take my mother? I cried, not paying attention to the cobra approaching. By the time I noticed it, it was almost too late. The snake struck. I rushed towards it, but just as it was about to bite me, he appeared. Somehow, he killed it before my terrified eyes. When I woke up, I found both of us in the hospital room. Grandma and Mom were crying. I panicked, sitting up, and looking at him weak and tired in bed. I heard Mom say he was treated for poisoning and had just recovered. I shouted, forgetting how much I hated him. "Wake up, Uncle. Wake up. Dad, oh Dad. Dad, you're my dad. Wake up." A hand gently held mine. I opened my eyes and saw through my tears his warm, loving eyes. I realized that even though my biological father was no longer here, I could still be happy like my other classmates because in this world I still have him. He is my father. As we wrap up today's discussion, let's take a moment to reflect on the key takeaways. We've explored the enduring wisdom of not letting worry about the future overshadow the present, and how understanding the immutable rules of life can guide us in securing our later years and the future of our loved ones. What insights have you gained from this conversation? I'd love to hear from you. Please share one thing you've learned and plan to put into practice in your own life in the comments below this video. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave your comment, like the video, and share it with others who might benefit from it. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated with more insightful content. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing your thoughts and contributions.